Well, Philip, I think you will start recording the meeting. So for everyone, we are recording this. It will be available after the meetup. And yeah, for tonight, we actually have two marvelous speakers for you, Isabelle and Rachel. And yeah, how should I transition to that one? We put a little effort into this, organizing this, and if you like our things we do, and we would actually like to ask you to give us a little support, a bit of love, so we can continue doing this. The licenses for Zoom cost a little bit of money and stuff. So if you like what we're doing, consider supporting us. That would be great. And as a little warm-up, we would ask you today to do a little bit of drawing. So please, everyone, grab some paper and a pen, and we will ask you to draw your favorite design method or tool on a piece of paper, and then we will put you all in breakout rooms, and you will let the other guys guess what you have drawn. So no words on the paper, just try to express the method with the best sketching you can. And how many minutes should we give everyone for that? I think.
Well, how about seeing that people are still trickling in? If we just do it in the main room.
Yeah, that's actually cool. Yeah, so everyone can join.
Yeah.
Just,
Plus,
people show it. So everyone, piece of paper looks like this.
I need to get a pen, Henning.
A pen is a. But you have kids; they should have pens.
I know. I mean, I have this pen, but I need like a Sharpie or something because it's easier to read. I guess some people out there are also looking for a pen, or am I wrong?
Heading. Okay. Everyone, take a few seconds to draw this. Actually, I prepared this very well here. See, but you don't have to show what you're actually doing. What could it be?
Should we already show, or?
No, I'm just explaining the exercise by example. Just keep it to yourself for now. And then in a few seconds, when everyone is done, we'll let some people show what they have. I'm not even sure if I'm doing this right. And maybe also something about process management. If you're designing processes. I don't know.
Henning is doing it Jeff Patton style.
Yeah, I got a little bit inspired on the past week. Did everyone get a pen, by the way? What kind of pen do you have? I'm actually like using those without saying the brand name. I think it's not Schleichwerbung.
Well, Sharpie all the way here. Mostly because the fumes make me more creative, I think.
That's the best side effect of those. Okay, not too many webcams on today, but people will need definitely one to share what they did. Okay.
By the way, that's a clever way to get people switching on.
No!
Constantly struggling in all the meetings and all the trainings I give. May I use this warm up?
You can license it.
Okay, let's do so. Yeah.
Oh, sure. This is sharing the knowledge. Sharing is caring. So please do so. Okay. Does everyone feel comfortable with what they have? I see some nodding.
Wait.
Okay. Sorry. Thomas, just one method, please.
I mean, it's complex.
Okay. Oh, speaking of complex.
You want to draw a complex design method? You're welcome.
I still have this one left here from.
I mean, you see.
That one conference.
Looks like product field.
That's complex.
Wow, that's even pretty well done, actually. Maybe I should also introduce a few people. Let's see.
Yeah.
Or maybe a son. I'm going to add a son here because
you should not write what it is, right? It's just a sketch.
No, just
and then people should
no writing. No,
and then it's like a charade or something, like people should guess what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
What could it be?
I think Thomas is. Can I
What
somehow? Can everyone see what Thomas did?
Can't see it.
It's people.
Looks like a sprint to me.
It's people.
Okay, let's give Thomas one. Then we go to Marjoline. Sorry if I'm pronouncing those names not correctly. So Thomas, you have. It's okay. It's a group activity. It's time limited, and it goes in circles.
Yay! You're good.
What could it be? What could it be?
Oh God, I don't know
anyone?
what the name of this activity is.
Say what?
I know the activity, but I don't know the official name of it.
So is it
The brand name, if you will.
The brand name.
The classic
Brand name Sprint?
What?
It's I don't know. I actually have to find. There's no name for it. It's a combination of brainwriting and like brainwriting 365, I guess is the name of the method, combined with speed sketching.
How about you call it the TG circle or something like that?
Yeah, let's call it the Thomas circle. It's kind of like it goes into the direction of Crazy 8, but it's not you filling out each part of the Crazy 8. You fill out one paper, pass it on to the next one after 2 minutes, and they build up on your idea. So it's a little twist to the Crazy 8. I personally like it more.
When do you use it usually?
If you want to get a lot of fresh ideas around, could be an UI, could be a product idea, and then just like say, hey, I need 5 people, and we iterate on some solutions for 10 minutes, and then go on.
Okay, cool.
How do you call it? How you
That's actually a good point. I should brand it. It's a mix of brainwriting 365. It's the methodology where like 3 people create 6 sketches in 5 minutes or something. I don't know, 3 minutes. So this 365, it kind of like describes the methodology.
Cool.
Thanks, Thomas.
I like these twists that enhance existing.
Sorry, I'm wrong. 635 brainwriting.
Just post it in the chat for everyone to.
Yes, I will do that.
And I saw that Mayoline. Sorry if I'm pronouncing wrongly. You were showing us something.
Yeah, it's my favorite. It's the base of everything. It's usability testing and interviewing users because it's fundamental to my decisions for my design decisions with the team. Yeah.
Could you show us again what is?
Yeah, this is like a tablet usability test.
It looked a bit like cursing in the first place, but it's not okay. Did you had a usability test on iPad app lately or something?
Yeah, on tablets in production plants, for example, for production lines. Okay. It's one of my latest projects. Also, yeah, mobile and desktop. But this one is the most interesting because it's not so usual setup.
Okay, cool. Anyone else who wants to share something with us? I think Benno is still drawing.
I'm ready.
Christina has something for us. Okay. First Christina, then Benno, and Christina. So looks like headphones.
The design method of shutting out the world.
I'm trying to right now, but my husband's talking, so it's loud. No, music.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it gives you focus to design and.
Oh, that's
But I'm gonna stay muted because he's loud. He's in a meeting.
Thank you.
Nice.
So Benno in
Thanks,
darkness.
Christina.
okay. So I have an answer for. I like the music thing. This is actually what I do as well. And I have different kinds of music for different kinds of moods I want to get into, like getting things, just doing stuff or becoming creative or whatever. So favorite tool is pen and paper. And method is that one. I redrew it. It starts on the outsides and stepwise it gets to the inner, to the center. Do you want to guess?
Yes. Starts on the outside and gets to the center.
Yeah, in steps.
Buy-in.
No. It's always the same amount of people. So it starts with the ones and single ones in the circles outside, and then they move towards the center. So it's 8 people in this case in total, just in different combinations. Shall I reveal the secret?
Yes, and I'm also not the only one who's guessing, I hope.
Okay, another way, because the first
crazy.
the first one I drew was that one, which is a different version of it.
Sorry.
And it is 1, 2, 4, all. Or in this case, 8 people sing in single, then in pairs, then in groups of 4, and then all together. Can be
COVID.
Huh?
Design methods.
I said COVID. No, I'm joking.
No, it's 1, 2 for all. It's there's a set of lightweight tools that are really easy to implement with nearly everybody, and they are called liberating structures. And it's about 30 something tools, and this is my favorite one. It's at minimum you need 8 people because you have to have pairs and you have to have groups of 4, but you can easily scale it up to even way more people. One problem, one idea. Everybody has 1 minute individually to think about it and write down his ideas. Then 2 minutes where people meet as pairs and exchange about it, and then 4 minutes 2 pairs meet. So single persons, pairs, 4 persons. And after 4 minutes, these groups of 4 share it amongst all. And this is a very powerful tool, 1, 2 for all, because you automatically build on the ideas of other and evolve the things. And there's a twist to it. Another tool in this liberating structures is called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z. It's an abbreviation of a Russian longer word. It starts with Teoria, whatever. This is using this 1, 2 for all 3 times. The first time, the first round is, what can we do to make this problem even worse? Second round is, which of these ideas to make it worse actually exist in our company? And the third one is how to solve these hindrances that we discovered in our company. And this is called depreciative thinking the other way around, and it helps even to overcome like this tool helping people to switch on the camera. Oh, I don't have any ideas, but everybody has ideas how to not do something. And so you get the people on that way. 1, 2 for all, liberating structures, 3 times, and it's Triz.
Can you
I love
repeat?
it.
So you said,
Pardon?
you said, what can we do to make the problem worse? What exists in our company?
Of these ideas,
Of the bad ideas.
that we just developed in order to make it worse.
Yeah.
So what of these ideas is actually true? And the third one is that now we know what is hindering the thing that we actually want to improve. So what is hindering improvement? So to develop ideas to overcome these hindrances, these odds in our company, why something cannot be improved. So this is one way of using Triz. So it's just switching perspective in several ways in order to come to solutions. But you
This
can
kind
use
of is reminiscent of machine learning too, because the way machines are learning, sometimes you have to go back to what these, they're essentially finding these problems that you didn't know exist because all of a sudden they find these other ways around how to do something.
Yeah, it's changing perspective and then finding the solution through thinking that way. Yes, exactly.
Cool. I see there are already some links being posted about the liberating structures methodologies in the chat.
Exactly.
Maybe, I know if you also have some input for us, would be great. And I think, yeah, we can actually switch over to Isabelle. Right now, Isabelle is not on camera right now. Is anyone else wants to share what he did as a design method? Oh, Isabelle is back. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, cool. Then let's do this. What can I tell about Isabelle? She's a product manager at Klarna right now, as far as I know and heard. Before that, you were a service interaction designer at Fjord Accenture.
Exactly.
And you're passionate about UX, data, and storytelling.
Exactly.
Very much. Okay, cool. So, yeah. And I was supposed to do the whole introduction of everyone. So we have tonight is Isabelle and Rachel. I will say some introducing words about Rachel later on after Isabelle's talk. So please try to capture the presentation, Isabelle, and take us away.
Cool. Thank you so much, Henning. Hey, everyone. As Henning already mentioned, I'm Isabelle. Let me share my screen first. So hope this is in presentation mode. So I was going to share a little bit about my learnings and the way that me and my team, I would say, have established a process around how we have evolved and pushed our KPIs and became more data-driven as a unit for the product that we were building. So yeah, I'm going to take it from there. Just short introduction about me. I've been 5 years at Klarna. I call myself a boomerang because this is my second time. I used to work in Stockholm, and then 2 years ago I moved to Berlin. I'm Swedish, and as already mentioned, I have a passion for both UX and data, trying to figure out how these two are actually correlating and how we can quantify user experience in general. I'm trying to master the skill of I would say cooking eggs very well in a lot of different ways. As I already mentioned, I'm a product manager, and I have up until recently managed a product called Insights that we offer to our merchants that are essentially selling with Klarna. It was a self-service analytics tool, hence also my passion for data came in both with the user experience and the problem space. Today I will be covering quickly KPIs versus OKRs. I know that this is a heated topic around in the product world. How I've structured and challenged the KPIs that I originally set and how it kind of evolved over time. And then how me and my team went to a more data-driven approach with our everyday work with our KPIs. So this came up because I actually did this presentation internally at Klarna just around KPIs in general. And one question that came up was actually like, what is the difference between KPIs and OKRs? Not sure if everyone is familiar with this, so I'll quickly go through what these are. So we have OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results. And then we have key performance indicators. Essentially, I look at OKRs like as a compass and a destination that we're heading towards. They're usually very motivational, strategic, might be more scoped, specific. There's a target, and they can be very aggressive to just create this motivation for teams. While I see KPIs as more of a temperature check, looking at these day to day or week by week, depending on what the goal is that you're striving for. We're looking at a process, what happens around us, what brings us forward, looking more at a quantitative perspective, of course. And I think that the progress of this is also slower to see a difference over time. Then why am I talking about KPIs and not OKRs in this talk? As I said, I would see OKRs more being a short-term measure and structure to apply for strategic initiatives. It usually has a very significant objective. So when you reach this objective, where would you go beyond? As opposed to the KPI, it's more for long-term evaluating growth or optimization over time, and helps kind of like guide you towards reaching your vision with success. So I'm gonna take it back a little bit. As I mentioned before, I have a UX background, working more within service design and interaction design. And as a designer, I usually worked more with principles and softer values, like how something should feel, or if it should be, we'll talk more about usability, which could be in a lot of different ways. How usable is this product? And I found it kind of hard to, going into product management, to really grasp my head around KPIs in general. So setting up this and starting with my product, I set up a few KPIs that I reviewed every time with my managers and leadership on a monthly basis. And after a while, like just looking at these numbers of number of users that we were tracking, or page views, or the session times, and things that I understood I should probably track this in order to validate the success. So for me, it was like, I have my KPIs and metrics in place, but I didn't know how to push it further to actually learn over time. So going back a little bit further, looking at what are we actually trying to achieve, I took it back to one specific lecture I had at school, where the presenter actually like gave more or less a very good format that I have ever since tried to get back to the KPIs. So everything starts with where we want to go. If you're having a product vision or your company's vision, essentially what you need to measure against and what you're, where you're heading. So with the goals, you have different KPIs. I wouldn't say more than 2 or 3 maximum, but it should indicate the movement you have towards the goal that you're striving for. A KPI can then also be built on several metrics, and every metric has a measure that you need to know where it comes from. And then essentially which data source is looking at, what is the dimension, are you looking at users, are you looking at sessions, are you looking at different things that you want to understand the success and the movement towards the top of this pyramid. So originally when I started with this insights product, the goal was essentially to increase merchant happiness, because they have access to data and also have them coming back over and over again. So looking at, okay, what kind of KPIs do I need to establish here? I picked probably the more, I would say, general KPIs, looking at how products are built, like number of active users in the section. Can we look at stickiness? Like, I think maybe some of you are familiar with daily active users through monthly active users, and then understanding in this bigger platform, what is our share of this? So I looked more or less at these metrics one by one every month, by not understanding how they kind of related to each other. So what I asked after some time was, what kind of processes will help me to identify how I am doing towards like when we move towards the vision that we actually want with this product. So instead, this developed into just like starting with the goal. We want to increase the merchant happiness and engagement. But we also know that we are belonging in a bigger context. It's not only about the active use that we have here. There's a lot of other forces that impacts whether the user gets to the product at all, or if it's applicable and usable for them, of course. So for instance, for this specific goal, I started to, we went into looking at, okay, what is the ratio of all the users that have access currently, and how many of those are actually interested in coming back over and over again? And how these trickle down to several different supporting metrics that we needed to find the data sources of and tweak them and merge them in order to have something that we could look at on a week-to-week basis. So yeah, this is, for me at least, something that I go back, if the goal shifts, how does that relate to, like, how does that relate to each other, both top and down, and where do I need to start digging for the data itself, what I need to measure, what are the dimensions I'm looking at, and how do I look at them separately, and then how can I track them by just looking at the KPI itself. I'm going to share a few things that help me to understand better what evolves around this business pyramid, and the fact that the goal can change and it can go different directions depending on what your product, what evolves around your product, and how different forces or happenings made at least me and my team more aware of that we needed to look at the data more granularly. So first of all, I would say that context really matters. Understanding what events that impacts your product and indirectly your user's behavior is not only the user itself. Of course, we look at the user interface, how it's used in terms of what pages are more relevant, which date ranges has been more attractive to the user, where are they clicking, could we track just the user journey in a way. But there's a lot of other things outside just the product that we started to consider in a way that helped us understand if the KPIs were really successful, or if there was other things that wouldn't necessarily have to do with the product. So I would say my learning is that data is quite important itself. And if you don't understand the things around on this road that you have towards your business goal, it's like driving in the dark with the lights off. So looking at this graph, there is a significant growth over time with a big dip, and then it catches up back again. But I think we could say in general, there is a slight exponential growth on an average. But this could be anything. This could be my sales during a day, or it could be the CPU usage for my service. But we don't know if it is on a weekly basis, is it a month, is it a year, like what are we actually looking at? It's actually the unique users we had per calendar week. So we started for this period over 3 months at 600 users. We moved pretty rapidly over the span of 2 weeks to a new peak of almost 60-70% growth, and then we had a big dip. And there's a lot of things that brought in here that actually helps looking at both the growth but also the decrease. So for instance, we had a new design going live, which essentially created better visibility and navigation for users. Before, our product were sitting below the fold on the home page, which essentially was not what the user did see directly, which helped us understand, okay, like we're actually, the product is probably attractive, but we're just not visible enough to drive engagement to here. Then there were additional changes to the navigation, where we did some changes within the product that helped to drive more, to make it clear where the user was in the structure. But this was also the last week before Christmas. So not only did we look within the product, it's also what kind of things happens around it in terms of the persona that we are actually delivering this product to. But then, of course, Christmas happens, holiday seasons, and since the bulk of our users are people who go in for their business, and everyone takes holiday during this time, it's not really something that you use in your everyday life as a private person. It's something that they apply to their work. But then after some time, business kicks back again as everyone goes back to work after holiday. And then we essentially released a new feature that we believe was going to drive more engagement and users back into the interface. And so we saw slight growth, but we also poked our marketing department, said, hey, can you send a newsletter just to tell about this product and see if this actually has an effect? So some of these things are important to keep in mind, that both of the activities that you're driving, but also things that you might not even be aware that are affecting your product, and just question if you have bigger dips or peaks, where does this possibly come from, and kind of be curious about the context. So my tip is that annotate releases, your marketing efforts, and keep key events at hand when you're analyzing your KPIs. Something I usually use is the annotation tools, or the annotation tool in Google Analytics that's easily accessible. And I think Amplitude has the same thing. But also like these other things that might affect satisfaction or the engagement in general. So like what is around when it comes to dependencies? Have you had downtime? Are you having incidents? Or other external factors, just like we saw here, where there was a massive dip in the holiday season, which could essentially drive down an average quite significantly. So these things, just keep them in mind to understand which kind of story that the data is telling you as well. So if context matter, I would say that your dependencies definitely do too. So especially within software product development, we usually work with a lot of different services, fetching source data from one place or several places, or the fact that we are on a platform where a lot of different microservices are active right now. Keeping in mind, like, is your product actually dependent on these other services, or will your KPIs essentially then also have a dependency, and how the numbers are affected? So not only staring blind on the number, it could be other things that also affects, of course. So in our case, we're being part of a platform that's called Merchant Portal. This portal has different functionalities for merchants to use with Klarna. So they have access to reports, they have access to their orders, they have access to insights. And let's say hypothetically that we have 100,000 users, but this platform also has user access. So there's another layer of things we need to consider when we're measuring ourselves towards a ratio, and benchmarking ourselves of how many users in this platform are actually actually using our tool, and not staring ourselves blind at, oh, it's only 5%. Well, in this case, we potentially reach 30% of the users. So understanding how our dependencies are working and how their service is designed in order to have a fair picture of how we're actually performing. And essentially, are there other things we need to do outside of what we can control, which could be an activity around invite your users to gain more insights in the merchant portal. Another thing could be different SLAs. So for instance, in this portal, it should be always up because we're responding to an end customer and the promise that we have. The same thing for our service, it should always supposed to be up, but we were essentially sourcing our data from a warehouse, which only had weekday support. So in this case, if their service goes down on a weekend, then we're not really able to deliver on our promise and then meet our KPIs of having, for instance, data within 24 hours. So these kind of things is important to understand how it connects to each other. So I would say when it comes to dependencies is keep close conversations with your stakeholders or the people you depend on or the products you depend on. Learn how their service is designed. See what kind of promise that you're both are offering to you as a consumer of their service, and also how that trickles down to your consumer of your service. And it could actually be worth having a stakeholder agreement for these kind of things as well. Then my second tip for this is to also understand what kind of SLAs and uptime are your dependencies having, and what service agreement are they also established. Yeah. And then lastly, question and gather some lessons from this. without reflecting and iterating on your KPIs or the metrics that you're looking at, we will not know what essentially brought us back or forward. I think this has been the key thing I've done with together with my team. So we usually set KPIs in the beginning. And for me, I didn't really, as I mentioned before, I didn't really question or revisit them very often until I questioned why they felt so stagnated, or when I wanted to tell a richer story about why we all of a sudden had a 10% increase somewhere, where that actually came from, and if I could amplify that growth. So in the beginning, I share this question of which processes will help me to identify how I'm doing towards my vision. But then essentially, after a while, asking which processes do we need to change to improve our performance so we can reach our goal, essentially. So I work in a very engineering heavy team, and what helped me from being the product manager, looking a lot at the UX of the product, they had much more knowledge about how things were requested, how different types of data were built in the query that essentially showed the data to the merchant. And they knew much more about all the errors, everything that was service related. So we essentially sat down together on a monthly basis, reviewed the status quo of the KPIs, but also the supporting metrics. So looking at how much growth or decrease did we have? What could this be caused by? What are the supporting metrics? Can we also compare them against each other? We agreed on a few action points of either features we wanted to develop or corrections we want to do in our dashboards or other things we wanted to essentially track to learn more. Implemented this, and then the next month we went through our usual routine and also saw what kind of improvements did we see from the action points that we established. So I would say my tip to you is to create a review routine with the team and keep valid intervals. It doesn't really make sense to go from a day-to-day basis, might weekly, depending on what you're looking at, of course, or if you're doing bigger changes or something needs to be more monitored. We did it monthly, and I would say compare intervals and keep these consistent, just to have to know how you're developing over time more consistently. And then I would say also don't be afraid to dive deeper into the supporting metrics and see, did anything change? Was anything affected in terms of the supporting metrics as well? It's not only up to your KPIs where they can be affected by different things. And then essentially drive decisions and establish clear action points. I think keeping track of the changes that you're implementing. So if you're doing anything that will essentially affect the tracking that you're doing, annotate this and know when something significant happens so that you're not blinded by another peak or dip that essentially might not have to do with the more user-oriented metrics. And always keep track of these for your reviews that you're doing. And then essentially, like when you have your KPIs, keep them easily attainable. You can have a lot of supporting metrics that you might want to look at from different perspectives. So when you want to dive deeper into a specific problem, just knowing where you have that data accessible. But the KPIs should really be what matters in your journey towards your product success. So wrapping this up, keep track of the events that are impacting your product and map them against your KPIs over time, every time you revisit them, because context do matter. And so does your dependencies. So get to know them, understand how their services are built, and essentially have a closer relationship to see if you either collaborate or where you support one or the other in order to develop together. And then by routine, analyze and dive deeper into your KPIs with your team, because I can tell you that made a huge difference for us when we pushed ourselves in improving from what we could learn from the numbers. Then I leave it for questions.
Well, first of all, thank you, Isabelle, for this. I'm quite blown away. It's a great presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, I saw that there were some questions in the audience. I think there was one by Florine, actually too. Florine?
Actually, a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thomas.
Florine too, yeah. I can take over if you want, yeah.
Thank you.
So first question would be, do you have regular review sessions? I mean, you with cross-function teams or with internal stakeholders to check the KPIs? Do you have like a meeting cycle, KPI meeting cycles with different kind of people in your org?
So we do have on a larger or higher perspective, or how can I say, on a more like on a domain level within the merchant domain, we look at some shared metrics and KPIs that we want to achieve. So I have an indirect connection to those with my KPIs or other things that I know will support it. We review each other's KPIs on a monthly basis as well, but not really going as deep into it as I've done with my closest team. So, but I think that is essentially also like understanding a whole merchant journey, for instance. That would be the next step to kind of develop that further by understanding and having shared KPIs, or just, okay, I know that there's something that we might look at on a quarterly level, which everyone just keeps their eye on as well.
Mm-hmm. But with your team, I assume it's like on a weekly or bi-weekly basis?
In my team, we did it on a monthly basis as well. We saw that the cycle of, or the routine of the users were either weekly, or some actually use it daily, either weekly or monthly, to kind of understand how our changes or the things we did affected different users. And then we could essentially just drill down in different periods, but monthly was enough for us.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a question from Yuri. Did you have KPIs that didn't change even though the respective metrics shown the growth? And what did you do?
So if the KPI, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Okay. Have you had, I think maybe Yuri, if you're here, you can step in and help us to understand your question a little bit more. So have you had the KPI that does not change even though the respective metric shown the growth? What did you do?
Actually, no, not that I can think of. I would like, theoretically that might happen if you're looking at an average of something and you have two metrics combined, or if there's a ratio where one part of it stagnates and the other one, or like one is growing a lot and the other one is decreasing. But yeah, mathematically that might, I don't know if that makes sense. No, I would say not that I can think of, but that's a very interesting thought, and how that would actually work in that case.
I have a question to you actually. So there are some kind of like metric frameworks out there, like the pirate metrics with acquisition, retention, revenue, this kind of stuff. There's also kind of like UX metrics from Google, this heart metrics with happiness, engagement,
Yeah.
Do you for like newbies to get started, what do you suggest, like being the top 5 KPIs or something, or any framework you can start with? Although I personally agree that, like you said, you have to look at what the goal of your company is and what your product wants to achieve. But is there any framework you can start with, or do you say that that's all crap? You have to like do a workshop, do this all together, and find metrics and KPIs for your specific product? What's your thought on that?
So I don't have a specific framework. I think the ones that you're mentioning are like, I would say it's called Pirate.
Pirate metrics.
Pirate metrics, yeah.
Acquisition, activity, retention.
Activation.
Activation, yeah, retention, review, like that they give you some stars somewhere.
Referral.
Referral, exactly. Hey, cool. And then revenue.
So I think definitely like that I think there's a reason why there is a framework around it, because it's applicable to a lot of different products, or I think essentially startups have used this a lot to just like show growth and understanding like the whole user journey, more or less. And kind of the attractiveness of the product. So I think it's good to start there, but essentially as time goes by, if you can go back and question, like, does this really make sense for us? I think especially when it comes to retention, looking at, for instance, the daily active users through the monthly active users, it doesn't really represent the real picture unless you know how many times a unique user is actually coming back, because right now it might be that you have the average of your daily active users is very like, I think that metric can be very unbalanced if you don't know the behind factors, because you're essentially taking an average and dividing it by a total, but it doesn't really say like, it gives you an understanding maybe of the retention, but I think it's even more important to then see, okay, can we be even more specific with by looking at how big portion of these users are actually coming back daily, really, or is it more on a weekly basis? Like, dive deeper into the metric after a while if you see that it goes in a certain way, and be critical about it. I think in terms of heart, it's definitely good because it gives you more of a qualitative feeling of how your product is perceived, not so much like the pirate one. So I think it's good. It's just like, in the end, what makes sense when it comes to your goal, like what do you want to achieve? So I would definitely say good start, but also be critical after a while. And then don't look at too many KPIs as well.
That's a good point, actually. What are enough KPIs? From my own experience, I've seen product people measuring only one KPI, like, for example, churn, and that was the main thing, or a net promoter score, and that's the main thing. And then I also saw people like having this huge dashboard at the wall with, I don't know, 15 different things they're tracking. I was like, okay, so many numbers. What is the most important for? Yeah, they're all important. Okay. So what is your, is there like a good rule of thumb for you? Like, for example, at OKRs, I think they say 3 to 5 objectives, not more.
Yeah.
Is this similar for you, for how you would treat metrics, or is it like free for everyone to pick?
I mean, as I mentioned before, I think when it comes to KPIs, like the things that you can look at on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis that essentially helps you to understand where you're going, should be maybe 1 or 2 per goal. But then you can have a lot of supporting metrics. And I think keeping that as in not really the truth of where you're heading, but more as in like a curiosity level of, okay, we actually had an increase of 5% from last week to this week. Which actual supporting metrics can I see that this growth might contribute from? You see what I mean? So, and like, you can have a lot of supporting metrics, but if you have too many KPIs, then what are you actually assessing your success for? So that's where I at least try to keep it very small. But then with time and also going into reviews, trying to learn where the growth or the decrease comes from, and have like knowing where you have all these supporting metrics. I think we had essentially 3 different dashboards, one for the UX or the UI and the UX, one for our backend service and all the requests we got regarding the data, and then our operational dashboards. And that, I mean, how many metrics I was looking at then? It's like up at 50 that we had access to. But just knowing how they supported the KPIs, I think, is the importance.
Interesting. Actually, we had a very interesting, I think one of our longest threads in our Slack community, by the way. Henning, if you can post a link to our Slack community. Now, what I want to say is that one product manager said all companies, or many companies, are crazy about measuring activity and like time spent in your app. And in best case, your users come like every day and use it as long as possible. And he was questioning if this should always be the main goal. It then went into the direction of like ethical metrics and ethical design. What is your stance about this focus on activity and time spent in app?
Oh, wow. It really depends on what the product is supposed to do for the user. So in here, if the activity is, let's imagine that we are like Medium, for instance. I go every day and read during my morning. Sometimes I read 1 article, sometimes I read 5 articles. So then I'm an active user according to their activity metric, and but I can fluctuate when it comes to engagement. But then, so that's one part, but then is there another goal for me as a user to achieve that essentially makes the product successful? So yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's good to look at and see how that goes over time. I would also say one other thought I had now is also like the fact that segmenting is also really important when it comes to activity, because essentially looking at types of users, start to do segments for either how active they are or understanding where users are coming from could be the next step. So I think measuring activity is good, but I think that can stagnate you in terms of understanding how you evolve the product for either different users or just staring blind on how much eyeball time you're essentially generating from it. Yeah. But that I think will be the next step.
There's a question from Philip here, who's wondering what kind of North Star metric are you using and how do you pursue those? I mean, are you having a North Star metric at all actually? And how do you keep track of those? Or Philip, if you think that's a bad summary of your question, please just unmute yourself and go ahead with asking. I think so. Do you have a North Star metric, and how do you keep track of that if you have one?
Good question. I have not had a North Star metric. If I think about the goal, which is kind of broad, that we had, of course, like I would reframe maybe the goal to be more ambitious, as in we should be the most attractive product in this platform. Let's just take an example. And that would essentially, for us, be to look at the ratio, just as we did now, to see can we achieve 100% access for users, and can we also make it attractive enough for them to come back every day. So I think that's where the goal and the KPI needs to relate to each other, and the goal can of course be very aggressive. But knowing then maybe how you assess it. I'm not sure if I have a better answer on that question.
Well, I just hope that satisfies Philip's curiosity. I would also close our Q&A session here at this point and hop over to Rachel. I'm going to take back the presentation. So thank you again, Isabelle, for great talk and for the very extensive Q&A. And next on after KPIs now is Rachel. She's going to go into details about design sprints. She's currently a design lead at Google. She has led there over 20 design sprints with different startups, NGOs, and in Google itself. And she promised us to demystify the origins of those sprints, which lie apparently in music, games, and agencies like audio. I hope I summed this up correctly. So
that was great. Thank you.
All right, cool. Please go ahead.
I'm taking it away. Okay, so hopefully at this point everyone's seeing my screen. Please shout if you don't. And Thomas and Henning, I might ask you for a little assistance before I really jump into things.
Sure.
Because I would love to hear from folks just in the chat, or if you're brave and you want to speak out, that's also great. To speak a little bit about, you know, why you're here or what your experience with design sprints or other activities like that are. So just put in, you know, lots of experience, no experience, or if you have something specific you want to hear about, just drop that in now. I'll give everyone a moment. And while you're doing that, I'll do a quick contextualizing about myself. Depending, you've already said it all, no problem, that's great. Yes, that's me. Hello, I'm Rachel. As you said, I'm a UX designer at Google. I've been there for almost 7 years now. It's quite some time. And I worked on the Chrome team, and I'm currently working on the search team, specifically looking at how to develop better experiences for users in emerging markets. So that's kind of what I'm up to. And yeah, I do a lot of things to try to understand users better and to develop products that work for them. And one tool in the toolkit is the design sprint, or I actually really see it as a big selection of workshops and methods that are useful for a number of different things. So yeah, Henning and Thomas, any notes in the chat there? Any radio sound?
Not middle experience. I have run a couple of design sprints, participated in a few more. Little bit of experience, no experience, some experience. Have run 10 sprints so far.
Trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
that's very
I think can you also see what's tripling what's tripling in on the
I
chat?
cannot. That's why I asked. Yes.
Ay.
Thomas.
Have a bit of experience, build small consumer fintech, some experience, very scared about the wrong applications I witnessed many times. Just have theoretical knowledge. I'm a design sprint master. Okay, cool. Junior UX designer, but did a bootcamp that focused on sprints. I personally attended a design sprint session with Jake Knapp, if anyone cares. Yeah, so yeah, I just see like a broad range of zero experience to design sprint masters, actually.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Yeah.
I think that's you. Yes, good. I can't see anyone's face. All right, so that's very helpful. So it gives me a sense just of where everyone's at and what kind of things will be useful. So I'll try to touch on all of those things today. I'm conscious we have a pretty short time, so I'm gonna take you through my talk, do my best to kind of cover all the bases, and then we'll have some questions. And then afterwards, there's a short activity where you can try a sprint activity if you haven't done it before, and you want to give it a go. Maybe prepare for the correct application. Okay, so one other thing I want to mention as I dig into things, obviously a talk about design sprints in the current state of the world is quite an interesting one. I think you know, maybe people who are used to doing design sprints haven't had the chance to try doing them remotely, or other kinds of workshop activities remotely. Maybe you have, so maybe there are opportunities as well for you to chat about that, to share your insights. So I'm going to try every time I share something about a sprint or an activity to also mention, you know, how do we go about doing this remotely? How does that work? You know, are there any pitfalls to be aware of? Okay, so very briefly, I do want to talk a little bit about these two lenses. So one is jamming for fun, and sort of what I see as sort of the origins, or at least sort of the starting point for this type of collaborative creative activity. And then I'm going to talk about for-profit, which is, you know, how we use design sprints and other workshop structures in the context of our actual work. That's basically it. So yeah, so the first part here, the for fun, so jams, make-a-thons, and so on. What are these? Where do they come from? All of that. So I think what's important here is that all of these structures, whether it's a design jam, a make-a-thon, a hackathon, whatever other names you've heard, they're really all this pretty similar process. I'm a little remiss, I'm in London today, and we're living in London right now, and I'm not showing the double diamond, but there are a lot of different ways of drawing this diagram, right? Starting with developing an understanding of the people, the technology, and the business, the framing of the problem itself, exploring the problem more in depth. So that might include brainstorming and prototyping and doing more to sort of look at different solutions and how those solutions work for people. And then the last phase, the development phase, actually building something, getting it into the hands of users, and I think most important, looping back, and obviously once the thing is in the hands of people, then you learn a lot about you know, what it is that you've built and how it works. So this is a cyclic process. Okay, so the original jam, I think Juan is actually in the call today. I might have seen him earlier. This is a photo of our band that we had in Munich. It was a jam band with 2 ukuleles, and the reason I bring this up, I think, is it's really the idea of this like jamming or collaborative sprinting, I think in my mind really comes from music, right? It comes from this idea of sort of listening to what someone else is saying, learning something from them, and then kind of figuring out what you can add that's going to, you know, provide value or make something beautiful. So that's sort of my take on things. Another source that I want to mention here, and it's actually something that in addition to having your own band, you can all participate in. These are some images from the Global Game Jam. The Global Game Jam is a yearly international event. It's usually held in February, or at the beginning of February. And basically how it works is you show up, there's a big group of people and everyone kind of makes teams. You have a briefing or sort of this inspirational starting point, and then you have 48 hours to build a game, a computer game or a digital game of some kind, sometimes a board game for some teams. And what's really cool about it is, again, you sort of are starting from this arbitrary set of restrictions or this framing. And again, you kind of are all building on each other's ideas to sort of get somewhere. And you don't really know where you're going to end up, but the process of collaborating is what creates that endpoint. So I think that's sort of the starting point for all of these social types of jams. So, you know, maybe you've participated in a make-a-thon or an evening event or a weekend event where you have some kind of framing, and you know, these might be more professional and more serious, or maybe more playful and fun, and they might, you know, kind of play more on the creative aspect of things and the ability to sort of generate ideas more broadly, or they might play more on sort of the concrete restrictions, they might play more on the technical, but again, it's all about the same approach, the sort of collaborative creative process. Okay, so specifically I want to at this point introduce, well, what is actually a design sprint? So a design sprint, there's a specific term that was coined by, or at least has been written about by the Google Ventures team. That's this idea of an event where a multidisciplinary team moves through the creative process to address a very specific problem in a very set period of time. So if you're following their process, it's 5 days. There are a lot of different sort of, you know, owned processes from all the different, you know, design agencies, and many companies all have their own kind of sort of specific process that they use. And there's a lot of overlap, but I think it's really interesting to kind of dig into the differences, because a lot of them have iterated very thoughtfully about, you know, how they're going to approach it. And I'll speak today to sort of the design, the Google Ventures sprint process, as well as the process inside of Google, which is actually a bit different than that process as well. So yeah, design sprints at Google. And this is where I'm going to kind of dig into the meat of things a little bit more. So there's really 2 types of design sprints at Google. I think, you know, maybe you've heard about the different ones. There's the Google Ventures sprint, which was originally designed for working with startups, right? The Google Ventures team, they invest in different startups, and their process is really more targeted at a small group who have a very concrete problem that they need to solve. You know, they have a runway to solve it, and then they have to solve it in that time. It's very, very precise. There's also the version of that process which has been commodified across Google by Nadia Dyrkova, who you know, took that process and tried to make it more flexible, I would say. I think it's really, you know, it works well if you want to have a small group of people. It also works well for, you know, big teams that are trying to gain consensus around something. There's more flexibility to it. And I think it's important to kind of be intentional about how you want to use your design sprint, and even more importantly, in my mind, to communicate very intentionally about how you want to use any, you know, whether it's a design sprint or workshop or start, pause, continue, any group activity. I think it's very, very important to just be intentional about, you know, what we're going to do and what we hope to achieve. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so what exactly is the structure here? You know, what should it look like? Well, again, it's very similar to sort of the image I showed earlier, which I actually think is from IDEO or maybe Frog. I think you know, it's fairly straightforward. You start by understanding the problem. I'll dig a little bit into how to approach this, but basically you want to understand the problem from sort of all the different angles, not just from a design perspective, obviously, but from a business perspective, from you know, any user research that you have conducted or need to conduct during the event, you know, the market space, the technical opportunities and challenges, all of that you need to kind of, you know, get into that section of this sprint. So then you move on to defining the problem. You want to kind of map the main user flows and understand sort of where you're targeting your solutions. You know, are you designing a holistic thing? Are you focusing on a very specific set of problems? And what problem exactly are you going to solve in the sprint? I think that framing is really critical. And again, I'll talk a bit more about that. So then, of course, the diverge and decide. You want to define and brainstorm around that challenge, and in decide you want to kind of focus in. So this is really the meat where you're starting to, you know, sketch solutions. You're starting to go broad, and then when you decide, it's about saying, well, here are the pieces that we really need to learn about, right? We need to test these pieces to answer the questions we've identified in the first phase. That's really critical, and I think that part sometimes doesn't get clearly articulated enough. That in the first section, you identify, here are the problems we need to solve. Here are the questions we need to answer. And then in that final phase, you're answering them, right? You're testing to try to answer those research questions. So in the middle, you need to think, well, here are our questions. What is it that we're going to test to answer those questions, right? So that's really that phase. And then the last phase, I think it's, again, you know, you're building a prototype, the minimum viable product that's going to let you answer those questions, and then the validation phase. So to me, it's really, really important in any design sprint that there is actually a user testing component. I personally prefer to have it, you know, be on the last day of the sprint and to pull in a few people to come to a few sessions and have a very structured way of evaluating those sessions. But you can also do it, you know, the following week, run those sessions, you know, pull in a video, or put together a video of different clips. There's a lot of ways you can make sure that your team is really engaged with those findings and really, you know, actually picks them up and it iterates using those findings. I think that's the really critical thing. And of course, you want to do a final presentation where you evangelize the work that you've done so people really come to understand it and really come to engage with it more meaningfully. So that's the structure. I'm going to talk about each of these sections a little bit more detail. So the understand section, there's a lot of different ways you can approach this to kind of get what you need to get. It depends a lot on how big your group is. I think that's quite important. You know, who's in the room, and how are they going to be to work with. So I personally, you know, if it's a smaller group, if you can just have in the room the people who are actually working on the solution, I think that's the ideal, really. You're going to be able to make decisions quickly. You're going to have more time and more breathing room to make those, you know, to come up with those ideas and to make those choices. So in that case, where you're a small group, I think it works well to do what the Google Ventures team does. You know, they allocate time on the first day to bring in experts on each of these things. So, you know, who's the expert on the business? Well, maybe the CEO is the right person to speak to that, right? Who's the expert on the technical challenges and opportunities? Well, the technical lead is the right person. Your marketing lead can speak to the competitive landscape. Your head of user research can speak to sort of all of the work that they've conducted and what they've learned. What isn't on here, what should be on here, is the whoever the customer representatives are. So whether that means you have a phone bank answering, giving user support, having the person who leads that team, or having a representative of that team speak in that in your event. And in particular, I actually prefer to have talks be very, very short. So maybe a 5-minute talk at most, and then actually more important, having the team ask them questions and come to slowly understand things. I think that's the best way to have everyone really percolate, like really gather that information, because it's not just about getting that information, but actually more importantly, it's about getting everyone kind of to information parity. Right, everyone in the room knows all the same information and can kind of think in a shared way during the event. So yeah, that's the understand statement, or understand section. If you have a larger group, if you can't keep the room under 10 people, if it starts to go over that number, then you want to do this work ahead of time. So you can still have presentations, but they're prepared presentations. They're a set period of time, 10 to 15 minutes. You have breaks in between. One thing to remember for these events is that people are people, which sounds like a really nonsense statement, but I've been to many events where, the team can't allocate the amount of time that's needed, and tries to cram everything in, tries to trim everything down, get in all the steps, just make them shorter. But that just doesn't result in good ideas. It creates a lot of stress, and stress doesn't make people, thoughtful and creative. It makes people stressed out. And there are a few moments where it's nice to have a little excitement, right? I think a crazy eights is great. To kind of get everyone, moving. But when it comes to kind of making those shared important decisions, you really need the space to do it. So, for example, when you're doing the understand presentations, you need to leave breaks. So there's a limit to how long people can pay attention. I usually find it's a maximum of an hour if they're just listening to talks. So you've got to give them a break after an hour. And at least a 15-minute break, I think is great. And I try to, if it's not talks, if it's activity, I try to make it 90 minutes and then a break, 90 minutes and then a break. That's really important to kind of keep the energy up in the room. Okay, I think that covers everything here. Oh, the last note, in framing the challenge statement. So that's something, again, if you're a small group, you should do it in the room that day, allocate up to an hour for talking about, why are we here? What problem do we need to solve? And come with a draft, right? So that people can talk about it, then write it up on the board and edit it, all of that. Now, if you're a big group, again, you've got to do that ahead of time. So, you meet with all of the different stakeholders, you have a draft design sprint plan with your statement of, here's what we're going to try to solve in the event, and then you run it by all of them and collect their feedback and refine it. That's the only way to do it in the same way if you're a room of 20 people, in my opinion. Okay, so how do you do this if there's a global pandemic on? You can do it as video calls with the experts. I actually think this works pretty well. One thing that's hard though is, when you're doing these kinds of interviewing sessions, you want to be able to kind of collect all of the questions, collect everything that you're learning. A thing that's hard is, if you want to do a how might we wall or try to collect all of those sources of inspiration and insight, obviously that's a little harder to do in this environment. And I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a moment, but I think actually running your design sprint remotely from a slide deck works really well. Having the presentations for the experts in that slide deck, having everyone have access to the slide deck, and having some slides at the end with how might we sticky notes. I'm doing air quotes, I don't know if you can see, and then allowing people to kind of fill those in. I think it's actually a really great way to kind of keep people engaged. I'm not a big I'm not very optimistic when it comes to expecting that people are just going to sit in front of their computer screens and watch something. I think everyone is very tempted to kind of click around and do things. So instead, I think it's better to get them engaged with documenting. So, you know, when I'm writing down notes or trying to think of the how might we that comes out of this talk, then I'm more engaged, and I'm trying to pay attention to what's going on so that I can, you know, have something useful to say. So that's how I would tackle that. Yes, this is exactly what I was talking about. So do your sprint in a deck. And this is a screenshot from a start, stop, continue, actually, that we did recently. It's a little bit of a different format for a little bit of a different thing, but the same idea of these digital Post-its, I think, applies. So you just, you know, draw some boxes, you put them on different template slides so that people can copy them around, and make sure to have a place in there for the name. It's actually covered up with my sticky note here right now so that people don't get confused. And I've actually found this works really, really well. The only thing that doesn't work well is having them as a group sort the sticky notes. I would not do that all together in the same slide deck. You've got to choose some captains to be responsible for certain sections and do it during a break. Okay, so moving on to the define section. This is the section where we're starting to, you know, really understand what it is we're going to tackle. So here, tools like journey mapping or storyboarding are really useful. Usually what I like to do in this phase is to just map the existing user journey. Whatever product it is you have, I just get out a big whiteboard and I draw the user journey, or at least the core user journey, the one that we're going to focus on for this event. And this is useful for a few reasons. You can use that map to pull out how might we's and stick them on. You can sort the how might we's on there. You can dot vote on the user journey, the areas that users, the participants in the sprint think are interesting or important to work on based on the expert interviews. It's a really powerful tool, because as soon as you start to map it like that and start to place on the how might we's or the dot voting dots, then you can hone in on a problem area right away and make decisions more quickly. The other thing that needs to be defined in this phase, I think, is the success criteria. So this is really important. Now that you know, well, what problem is it that we're here to solve today or tomorrow or this week, and you know, what are the opinions of all of our experts? Well, then we then can say, well, what are the success criteria for the problem we're trying to solve? And that can be done if you're a small group. Do it as a discussion. You know, I'll do like a brain writing exercise. Everyone gets 5 minutes. Write down as many success criteria as you can. Choose your top 1 or 2, and then we put them all up, or we dot vote on them. You know, you can also, again, do this ahead of time if you're a big group. I think that makes a lot of sense. Usually what I'll do is I'll talk to the key people, the technical lead and the product manager, and the UX lead, or if I'm the UX lead, I'll add my 2 cents, and then we'll put those up on the board and give the group some time to discuss them. You know, usually there's just a little bit of tweaking that goes on, like, hey, well, we said it was this metric, but actually, you know, this metric is a better reflection of what we're trying to get at. Or, oh, it's actually, you know, you need to do a little bit more complex thinking to get to the real metric. It's X metric over Y metric. That's usually the kind of conversation that takes place there. And then again, if you're having to do this during a global pandemic, Miro and Figma are both great for many of these things. Actually, I wrote journey mapping, but you know, you could do a whole design sprint in Figma if you wanted to do that. I think storyboarding, again, it's good to use Figma or Miro for this kind of thing. There's a lot of ways you could go about doing that, but I think they're useful tools, and obviously your whole team needs to have access to them, so the view-only license for Figma is useful. Okay, so thinking about diverging, this is the moment when you're starting to actually put ideas down on paper, and I think there's a lot here. I think, first of all, this is the moment where this is kind of the make or break moment for any cross-functional team. I think often there's a lot of discomfort around drawing, which, you know, doesn't need to be so. I often put up something that comes from the Google Ventures team. it's a slide that just says all of your drawings should look like this, and it's a Da Vinci illustration, the Vitruvian Man. It's a beautiful illustration, and everyone, you know, goes and then laughs because it's a joke, obviously, and no one's drawing is going to look like that, and it doesn't need to. So I think that's really important to express in that space, and if you can use humor to do it, I think that can relax people a little bit, because it is important to draw here. That's one thing that's really critical. It comes back to this idea of making your ideas visible to the group, right? We're all in the same room, not because, you know, we all want to be in the same room, that's all nice, but we're in the same room because we need to make our ideas external and create a shared map of our thinking. And so when we do any kind of divergence work, like drawing crazy eights or solution sketches or anything that allows us to put our ideas on paper, it's really, really important that those are expressed visually because they're easier to consume quickly that way. So there are a lot of things here. So this includes tools like crazy eights and solution sketches. So basically, you know, you can find a lot of like specific ways that you're supposed to do this, but I think, you know, I've actually started to do crazy eights, but give everyone 20 minutes for crazy eights and allow them just a bit more time to kind of draw, you know, these 8 sketches on those 8 squares. We're actually going to do this at the end of the day, but with 4 squares because it's the end of the day and we're all tired. But the thing is that, you know, it is useful to kind of generate. But I also find that actually when it's lower stress, people are more relaxed, they come up with more ideas, they come up with more different ideas. That's just my take on it. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling here. Let's come back to the point. So there's a couple of key things when it comes to doing these kind of divergence activities. The first thing is to draw specific ideas. So again, drawing matters, and making it visual also matters. The next is actually write real strings. So one thing I notice when people are drawing little wireframes on their paper is that they'll write in lorem ipsum, or they'll draw a squiggly line to represent text. But actually when you're trying to solve concrete UI problems in particular, it's more important to get something realistic down, like a real string down, even if you're not really happy with it, because in this process, you're actually going to iterate on the strings as well. And that's actually really, really important because the high quality, like the string, it matters so much in terms of how you communicate, what you communicate. And so having the space and time to iterate on that as well with the team is really useful. Okay, I think that covers that. Again, if you're doing it remotely, I think the easiest way to deal with that is to draw it by hand as you normally would. I think that's still the fastest. And then I would just take a photo of it with my camera phone and I would put it in the slide deck. And then that allows everyone to just talk about a shared set of things. Okay, so talking about making decisions, I think this is actually the hardest part of any sprint, harder than getting anyone to draw things. So coming to a decision about what to make in test is kind of the make or break moment. Like everyone, you know, this is when it gets stressful, this is when it gets hard. And I think there are a few ways to deal with that. So the first is dot voting. The Google Ventures process does this really well. I think they have sort of a, what's it called, heat map voting followed by decider voting. So how that works is everyone on the team, you know, well, first things first, you put up all of the different sketches on the board, usually solution sketches, and space them out. Give time for everyone to look at them all and try to decipher them, usually up to 15 minutes. And then you have everyone dot vote on the pieces that they find interesting and useful. They usually do a process of sort of critiquing the ideas based on those dot votes. So everyone goes around the room. You know, the leader or the facilitator of the event actually will sort of narrate what they see in each sketch. And then there's time for everyone in the group, anyone who dot voted on any particular aspect of that design, to say why they dot voted on that, why they thought it was interesting. And then at the end, the owner of the sketch can fill anything that was missing. I actually really, really like this process. I think it does a good job of kind of making democratic the process of deciding, because often people will maybe gravitate towards the person in the group who is in a leadership position, towards their ideas, but maybe there's something that is a better idea, or certain ideas stand on their own better or more easily understood, and I think this process does a good job of helping choose those ideas. So the last step in that process, by the way, is for the sprint to designate a decider. So that's a way of being honest about who's actually going to make the decision in the sprint. That might be the team lead, it might be the company lead, but giving those people kind of a bit of an extra vote. This is interesting because it's actually very undemocratic. I think it's a smart direction because it's actually honest about who's going to have the weight in the end. So you don't make a decision in the sprint that gets reverted afterwards because someone in a leadership position isn't really happy with it. So having gone through this process of doing the heat map dot voting, discussing the heat map dot voting, and then having a good picture of it, at that point your deciders can maybe take a vote. You might have both the deciders and the team have a final vote at that point, but you might give the deciders an extra vote, for example. And that's a way that you can kind of choose the pieces that are interesting to test. One thing that's sometimes missing in discussions at this point is the fact that you actually need to have something to test, and not all of the pieces always fit together. So there's a little bit of work that happens here that you need to leave time for, which is, either you have two different ideas and they need to both be tested, and that's great, they stand on their own. Maybe you have some pieces of different ideas and they need to be brought together into a single idea that can be tested on its own. And you need to do that in a way that allows you to kind of just get meaningful insights. What's really important is the thing you're testing isn't necessarily your final product, right? Like you're testing something to learn, to answer your questions, to learn. So that might mean that you Frankenstein together two pieces that don't really belong together, but that they're not, on the same screen, they're separate screens, so you can kind of get a good understanding of them. I think that's really, really important to remember because, people can sometimes get really connected or cling to this idea of, well, this isn't what we're going to ship. But I think that's okay. You're not trying to design the thing you're going to launch. You're trying to design the thing that will answer your questions. Okay, so then the last phase is prototyping. Just seeing if I missed anything here. No, I think that covers it. This is the point where it's harder and harder the bigger the group is. So the smaller you can keep your group, the better. Okay, so talking about prototyping. Oh, sorry, by the way, all of this can be done again in the slide deck with dot votes. I make a template with lots of little dots on them and, put people's name by a color so people can pick them up and drop them in easily. Okay, so prototyping. What you need to do is you need to build something that you can put in front of your users, or in particular your study participants. So tools like Figma and Sketch are obviously the go-to at the moment. Keynote is fine. You can actually buy like templates of material design or iOS that you can put together in Keynote, or whatever other presentation software you're using. But what you need to do is, if you have more than one designer, you obviously need to agree on which tool you're going to use if you're creating one single shared flow for testing. You need to map out the flow and divide it amongst yourselves. This actually, you're likely to have many designers rather than just one, but okay. And then you need to know how you're going to combine them all. So that might just mean, we email all our files into one person and they combine them in Sketch. Or it might be that we're all working in the same Figma file. This is really easy, and so they connect it up at the end and then it's ready to go. But you've got to work that out and put together a prototype that's going to help answer your questions. I think that's pretty straightforward. And then the validation. So I think this is probably the thing that people find the hardest, and it gets harder the bigger the team or the higher the stakes. But to me, this is the most important thing. In fact, this is the whole point of doing the design sprint. you've got to test with users, and ideally you do it in front of the team because they need to sort of see the fruits of their labor, right? Like it's not just about designing the thing, it's about actually figuring out if the thing works. So usually what I do for this is I try to structure it, you know, there's a set of tasks or a set of screens that they need to go through. We want to, you know, be the psychologist, so have them walk us through those screens, thinking out loud and explaining what they see, asking questions like, you know, what do you think that is? And, you know, how do you feel about that? To try to get at, you know, whether they're understanding what the thing is and whether they're perceiving, you know, the parts of the UI you need them to perceive, whether the product is clear to them and whether they know, you know, what the offering is and how they can go about getting it. All of those details I think are really, really important. I think a friend of mine recently asked me, you know, how do you go about analyzing this? You know, you're going through these like probably 6 to 8 user testing sessions all in one day, sometimes with like a rotating cast of team members who are going to, you know, pop in for one session and then pop out. So usually what I do is I create a grid on the board that you know, defines each of the sections that we're going through. So maybe there's one screen. There might be specific questions we want to ask. So you might have one screen and then you might have one about, you know, the question you want to get answered on that screen, just vertical lines for that, and then horizontal lines for each of the participants. So you end up with this grid where you can, you know, stick sticky notes, or, you know, if it's a yes or no question, you can put like a check mark or an X or a sad face or a happy face. And by doing that, you end up at the end of the day with this map, and you can kind of just go through each vertical line with the question or the screen with clear takeaways for each of those things. And so if you set all of that up right, you take the sort of goals and questions from day one and you translate them into research learnings at the end of the last day. So that's sort of, and then you take all of that and you package it up into your takeaways from the sprint. So you have, you know, here are the goals and the questions we wanted to answer, here are the options we considered, and then here's the thing that we landed on, why we landed on it, and we tested that with people, and here's what we learned. I think that's kind of the whole package that you want to then, you know, share with all of the people who participated, all of the people who bought into your sprint. That's obviously the most important thing at the end, is to make sure to present what you did and what you achieved, and celebrate those takeaways, because obviously this is such a big time investment for everyone who's joined, and everyone who, you know, gave you permission or had to, you know, think about the time allocation, the resource allocation. So you really need to show that that time was valuable. So that's a really critical aspect of it. And the celebration itself is really key. So obviously you can do the final presentation via video call, but I think personally, if you want to celebrate with the team afterwards, I use House Party, which is an app. It's an app that the kids are using these days. It's a much more casual environment, and that's the right kind of thing to have sort of a celebration with your team afterwards. So yeah, that just about wraps up what I'm going to say today. There's an upcoming breakout session where we're going to try crazy 8s or crazy 4s for the breakout session. And Henning is going to kindly remind all of us of these steps after we do questions. But what we're going to do is you're going to take a piece of paper, which I hope you have, and you're going to fold it in half 2 times. So you have 4 squares rather than 3 times to make 8 squares. So you fold it in half 2 times, horizontally, vertically. And then we have a design brief here. And we're going to spend 1 minute filling in each square in our breakout rooms with a different idea for how to solve the brief. And then assuming everyone still has the energy, we're going to spend 1 minute for each person to share their ideas with their team members, or just pick one idea if you prefer. The brief is, how might we enable patients to book appointments with their doctor via text message? And so you'll draw different UI ideas or UX ideas. You can flex it as you like in the squares, and you'll share that with your team. So that's the plan. And then the last thing I want to say before I wrap up is Obviously, I'm a big fan of the sprint book. I really think that the Google Ventures team has approached this very thoughtfully. You know, they've really iterated on their approach, and it shows, in my opinion. And their book is really helpful. I have my own copy. I've probably bought 3 of them by now, and it's all dog-eared at this point. And then the other one to have a look at, obviously, in relation to the user research component, I think Steve Krug's Rocket Surgery Made Easy is a great guide, especially if you are trying to run user research but don't have experience or don't have anyone on your team who does that but still need to do it. He has all sorts of useful resources. There's a checklist and a demo script in here, so it's just a really light, easy read that will give you everything you want. Okay, so that's everything for me today. Thanks for taking your evening and listening, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, let's do a quick Q&A, and then maybe a crazy 4.
That sounds good. I'm gonna unshare my screen here.
Okay, great.
If I can figure out how, there we go, good.
So I think I collected a few questions from the chat. Well, I think there was one larger demand for a remote sprint session, which you might like to pick up on in the future.
I haven't seen it. I will have a quick look now.
Do that. Yeah. So what do we have here? Philip was actually the guy who requested it, and Thomas and me and a few other people joined in that request actually. So it would be cool if we could do that at some point.
Wait, what is the request heading? Can you explain? Sorry, I can't find it in the chat here easily.
It was Philip who was requesting a remote design jam or design sprint.
I see.
For the new
we'll chat more later. Yeah,
we should. We can also get into the Slack community maybe for that. And
it looks like he attended a design jam. Philip, maybe you can say something about it.
So Rachel has done like a dozen design jams in the Munich Design Jam community, and I have attended most of them. But since she's left for London, the design jams kind of went away in the last year and a half or something. So I was wondering if remote is a good opportunity.
Actually, a good question. Thanks, Philip. It's good to see you, by the way.
You too.
I'll take that into consideration. Maybe Johannes has some time as well, and we can see.
That would be fun, because I think Henning, Monica, and Johanna, they started a side project within our community on Slack. By the way, maybe this is also something which can be like where we can join forces. Or what do you think, Henning?
Sounds like an idea. We should definitely discuss this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, about questions. Let's take this. I would just say, like, let's go to the Slack channel for later discussions. Would be great if Rachel can also join, and Philip, if you are not there, then please join our UX and product community on Slack, and then we can discuss like how we can take this further. That would be great. Yeah, any other questions so far?
Yeah, I found a few in the chat. So there was, I'm not sure what the name, Edwina, I guess it is. She or he was asking, are design sprints the main tool to build the product roadmap?
Interesting. I mean, probably not the main tool. Actually, I haven't tried building a product roadmap with the design sprint before. And they're not specifically structured for that, right? They're really more, I mean, depending on which type of sprint or workshop structure you're using, right? Like there are many different ones, and they are all a little bit different, and I think they're kind of optimized for specific things. So if you're talking about the Google Ventures sprint, it's really optimized for, we have these questions, we need to have an answer at the end of the week. You're talking about the broader Google one. It's actually a little more flexible. It has kind of all of these different components that you can combine differently. It still follows the same framework of like diverge, converge, prototype, and test. But it's a little bit more, there's a little bit of interchangeability that you can set it up more with, team alignment in mind if that's what you want to do. Though I'm stodgy and I like to stick to, I want to build something, we're going to test the thing and build it. And there's other ways to do team alignment as well. Yeah, anyway, come back to the question. I think it would be interesting to try to build the product roadmap using some kind of like sprint workshop structure. I haven't thought deeply about that before. So if anyone has any insights or resources on that, I'd be curious.
Cool. And there was another question from Hari. Rachel, you said about user testing in front of the team members involved. Won't that be a bit intimidating for the participants?
Sorry, can you? I'm trying to read this at the same time, and that's not working well. I said, yeah, user testing in front of the team members involved. Yes, yeah. Maybe I didn't communicate that very well. Good question. So yeah, there's a couple of ways to do that. It doesn't mean that the whole team should be sitting in the room with the participant. Yes, I agree. That would definitely be intimidating. More likely, what you should do is, for example, you could do the user testing remotely. I've actually seen this done with the Google Ventures team. They have Michael Margalis, who's the researcher who's actually based in Seattle, run a remote testing session with the participant, even if they're working from the New York office, for example. So that means like having that person call into some kind of screen sharing setup, so they can use the prototype either by sharing it with them and getting their impressions on it, or what have you. And that means that the team can then watch the video feed of the session. You might also, if you're at a company, some companies also have like a user testing lab where you can kind of sit on the other side of the glass. If you have that, that's also nice. I actually personally prefer the remote method because you can actually see things a lot better, unless you have a very fancy setup, and even then I think it's so at best. So yeah.
Very cool. Praveen was posting and asking, design sprints are famous for an over-reliance on doing and testing. Shouldn't a phase of extensive user research precede a design sprint? And additional one, if no, how are we ensuring that we are solving the right problems? The understand phase and the time box, the design sprint process doesn't seem to be enough for good user research to happen.
Totally agree. All of those things. Yes. Going into any design sprint, you should have the foundational research you need. So when I talked about bringing in the head of user research to talk about the work that had been done in the past, I think that assumes that you have the foundational research you need. There are many cases where you won't have that. You need to do it, right? So if you're planning a design sprint and you see that research is missing, you'll need to go out and get it, or have people go out and get it. Depending again on like how big is your team, how big is the company, that might mean needing, a few weeks in advance. It might, if I agreed ever again to do big design sprint events at Google, my standard lead time used to be 6 weeks. That's what you need if you're going to have 40 people in the room and they're all going to have opinions, and you have to conduct, thorough and comprehensive user research ahead of time. That might mean quite a bit of lead time. If you're a small startup, that might mean, we need to do 6 usability tests with this part of our product. We haven't done them, so someone needs to set those up and do them. That's maybe a week or 2 of lead time. Yeah, but definitely that's a good point, Praveen. Thank you for bringing it up.
And Kazbek was asking, do you use empathy maps or personas for design sprints?
Oh, you can, yeah. They are not explicitly built into the Google Ventures process as far as I remember. They are like in the Google process widely, they're sort of in the toolkit and you can kind of pull them in as needed. I think, they work well when you have really specific personas. I think if the product is, a huge product where everyone can be your user, I think they're less useful, whereas that's not often a problem you have outside of Google or outside of these like really big companies. And so you can use a persona really meaningfully, and that's really, really helpful. So yeah, I think those are both very viable tools. It's important to kind of, stick them into your process, your structure of the sprint in a way where they'll be meaningful. So what I always think about is just, what is this tool and what's the output of that tool? And like, where does that output need to be plugged in to the process to kind of come to the final end goal, which is our questions need to be answered. That's it.
Cool. Santiago Sardi was wondering what metrics do you normally use when doing user testing, like errors, satisfaction level, other things?
I probably would call them signals rather than metrics, and it depends very much on like the problem you're trying to solve. I'm going to take a fairly well-scoped problem as an example. So, you're trying to go through a checkout flow. The metric you're looking for is like, did people find the button, right? Yes or no? Did they discover the thing? Did it need to be pointed out to them? How long did it take them? This is, it's not that I'm going to sit there with a timer, right? But did it take a long time, or did they find it fairly quickly? I think is something that everyone can kind of feel. A thing that's really, really hard to gauge, and I still don't have a good answer for, is would someone have gotten through the whole flow if they weren't in a user testing session? I think that's something that, I like to try to guess at that. I think that, watching people go through the flow, oh, they didn't discover the button to proceed, would they have dropped off at that point? You're not sure, maybe they would have found it. Watching them go through the flow, oh, they're really confused about this part. They're not really sure, how much they're going to pay or what they're going to get. Well, I can be fairly confident that they probably would have dropped off at that point unless they really needed that thing. But again, you don't really know. So I think that's something that's really hard to gauge. And so that's why it's useful to look at things like discoverability and the clarity of the message. Did they understand X, Y, or Z? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's quite hard. Philip was asking, is there any material about the non-Google Ventures Google Sprint online?
I think the answer is yes, but I might have to get back to you.
Okay. We can also do that in the, I don't want to use the word aftermath, but I just don't know any other word right now. So after this thing, yeah. And our last question here.
I'm going to interrupt because the answer is yes, and it's very clear. So it's designssprintkit.withgoogle.com. That's the Google, the broader Google system, whereas Design Sprint Kit branded GVR, the Google Ventures process.
Okay, maybe someone can post that in the chat. And well, Praveen is wondering if time frame is kept aside. Is a design sprint any different from a typical UCD process?
Hold on, okay. Oh yeah, sorry. Time frame is kept aside. So I would say the Google Ventures process is a little different, not in terms of structure, but they just have like very specific methods. And I think that differentiates it a little bit. But in terms of the overall structure, like, no, it's not at all different. It's definitely the same. Okay, cool.
Those were all the questions. We are slightly a bit over time.
Sorry.
I will just offer it to everyone who's interested that we can still do the crazy fours if anyone wants to. Otherwise, I would wrap it up. Any shout outs for the breakout session?
Henning, I would say, I mean, if people want to stay a bit, I wouldn't mind having one breakout session just to wrap it up.
From my side, this is totally fine, yeah.
I love it. I was actually waiting for the breakout session the whole evening, so.
Then let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Rachel, I think you need to leave your mic on because I'm not exactly sure. Okay, fold it, take a paper. Everyone needs paper
one
again?
note for the breakout session. We usually stop the streaming then so that people are a bit more at ease to discuss. If everyone is interested in that.
Yeah. I would also say, I think the evening is over from this side, but I would encourage Henning. To be honest, I would just go for a just a breakout session where we just discuss whatever we want, just more free kind of like networking thing.
Yeah, that's
okay
totally with me.
Yeah, and by the way, please, if you have time and you want to push the quality of our meetups further, please go to uxproduct.com and fill out the survey. That would be very helpful. So whoever wants to start the breakout session, Henning, do you want to do it? Or
then just let me finish with the rest of our wrap up, and then we just jump into the breakout session for everyone to enjoy.
Perfect.
So if you want to join, okay, that was Jonas. So if you want to join our communities for further discussing what was happening tonight, so you can either join the UX and Product Munich people in our Slack, or you choose the other URL of the product people and get into the conversation with those guys. If you have a talk which you would like to present, just send us, submit your talk to one of those. And again, if you liked what you saw tonight, we would appreciate your support. And well, look out for the next meetings. I'm not even in the frame here. So us from Munich, we're going to have our next meetup in 1 month exactly. So you can check out which are the contents on uxandproduct.com, and the product people will have it already in, well, that's in 2 days. And if you check out the meetup group, you can see what is on. Unless Mirella, you want to add something?
Sure. That's also a collaboration with another group in Berlin that is called Cat Herding, leading techies into practice. So it's more engineering managers and product managers or design leaders talk about the techniques. And I cross-posted it because I'm giving a talk on how to onboard very fast as an external PM joining a company. And since we are a product management group, we thought that's interesting for the product people in the group.
Definitely, yeah. I would also say so. Cool. Yeah, well, that's the official wrap up. Was great to have everyone here. And whoever wants to join us in a little paper-related activity, just stay. And otherwise, thank you for dropping in and have a great evening.
Thanks a lot.
Please.